Well, greetings fellow dwarfers. Today we're going to have a look at just how massive the original Red Dwarf ship really is. So by the original ship, I mean the ship from the early seasons, not the one that you get from about season 8, so it's really long, or if you have the remastered Blu-rays, and not the ship that you see from Back to Earth onwards. So first, let's have a look at just how big the ship really is. It's pretty well known from bits of dialogue that the ship is 5 miles long. A really obvious example being from the episode DNA, where the cat specifically says, "A spaceship 5 miles long and they don't fit enough plug sockets in the scanning room." 5 miles. So let's overlay 5 miles onto the ship and see what we get. If we go right from the end of the ship, from the very front of the ram scoop, right back to the rear of the engine bell housing, we get a 5 mile long ship that has to be no more than 2.36 miles high, going right up to the top of those skyscrapers on the top of the ship. Now 2.36 miles may sound really big, but hold on a minute. In the episode Stasis Leak, the lift attendant tells us that we're going down to floor 16 and we'll be going down 2,567 floors, which gives us an absolute minimum amount of floors of 2,583, and it could possibly be much higher because we don't know what floor the guys started on. If we take our ship that's 2.36 miles high, divide 2.36 miles by 2,583 floors, we end up with an average of 4.82 feet per floor. So, that doesn't sound like very tall ceilings to me. So unless the JMC is planning to use the time wand on everybody, I don't quite see that one working. So let's try again and see if we can get a number that works a bit better. So if we look at the ship again, but just look at the area that's actually inhabitable, ignoring the ram scoop on the front and ignoring the engine on the back, just the section that you could actually walk around inside of, and call that 5 miles long. Now when we divide things up, the ship ends up 3.2 miles high, so almost a full mile taller than before. Divide 3.2 miles by 2,583 floors, now we end up at 6.5 feet per floor. Much better, a much better number. And of course that's just an averaged out figure. The JMC could have rearranged things a bit, robbed a few inches from unimportant floors and put it where the crew are going to spend most time, make those ceilings a bit higher, anything like this, but as an average, 6.52 feet makes more sense to me. So we've ended up with a pretty realistic sounding length and height for the ship, by calling 5 miles just the length of the inhabitable area. If you want to know the length of the entire ship, with the ram scoop and engine, it ends up as 8 miles long. And looking at the ship head on, if we treat it as an equilateral hexagon and ignore the skyscrapers on top, just measuring the hexagon section, we end up 3 miles high, which, using an online calculator because I couldn't work it out myself, we end up with the ship being 3.45 miles wide. So there we go, overall the ship's 8 miles long with the engine parts, 3.4 miles wide and 3.2 miles high. Right, that's just all numbers. Let's start getting some examples of real world things that we can picture in our minds compared to the ship to give us a better idea of just how gargantuan this thing really is. Let's start off with a big old bridge, the Humber Bridge. I cross this thing every day going to work. It is massive, 1.46 miles long. It was the biggest suspension bridge in the world for over 20 years. This thing is absolutely massive. However, when you stick it on the Red Dwarf, yeah, it looks pretty insignificant. You need 3.6 of those bridges just to cross the habitable area. So let's try another famous landmark, the most famous of all skyscrapers, the Empire State Building. At over 440 metres to the top of the spire, this thing is absolutely enormous, but you stick it on Red Dwarf and it just sort of disappears. You've got to zoom right in to find it. And you'd need 11 and a half of them to go from the bottom to the top of the dwarf. This thing is massive. Let's try another, the most famous cruise ship of them all, the Titanic. 269 metres long, and it just sort of disappears on Red Dwarf. In fact, you're going to need 30 of these to cross the 5 miles of the habitable area. This thing is massive. And don't forget, of course, this thing's a 3D shape. If we look at it head on, that Titanic just disappears in there. You're going to need 185 of them just to cross the widest part of the ship. And to fill the ship up, thousands and thousands of Titanics. Okay, so we've looked at some man-made things. Let's look at something a bit more natural. Ben Nevis, the tallest mountain in mainland UK, 4,412 feet high, or 1,345 metres. However, you stick Red Dwarf next to it and it looks absolutely minute. In fact, you can fit Ben Nevis inside a Red Dwarf multiple times over. Okay, so Ben Nevis isn't exactly the biggest mountain in the world. Let's look at the biggest. Mount Everest at 29,032 feet. This thing is enormous, almost 9 kilometers high. Put Ben Nevis next to it and Mount Everest just makes it look small. However, at 12 kilometers long, the Dwarf Tower's over it. Feel free to hum the EastEnders tune as you watch this next bit. Let's look at the Dwarf straight over London. Yeah, that's going to really change the opening of your favourite soap opera. Let's look at the size from a different point of view. At 3 miles an hour walking pace, going from the rear to the front of the ship, it's going to take you an hour and 40 minutes. And that's just one of the 2,583 decks. Suddenly, Lister using his space bike inside of the ship doesn't seem such a daft idea after all. And if you were to drive at 50 miles an hour along the habitable area of the ship, those 5 miles would still take 6 minutes to cross. This thing is huge. So looking at a shot like this with the ship slowly lumbering past the camera takes about 16 seconds to go right from the ram scoop to the back of the engine bell. Yeah, to go past in 16 seconds, that thing has to be going at 1,800 miles an hour. So actually, maybe it's not so slow and lumbering. No wonder the guys going down the lift from the top to the bottom of the ship took long enough for them to watch a movie. So Rimmer going on a rambling holiday across the diesel decks? Yeah, if they just cover a few decks, he could be in something the size of a county, easily big enough to go on a little holiday. An entire race of cat people living and evolving in the cargo decks? Well, yeah, if it's half the ship, plenty of space for people to grow up together. And when Crichton says that him and Rimmer made good time going down and back up 2,000 decks in just 5 days, well, yeah, he means it. That's like climbing halfway up Everest and back down in 5 days. They really did make pretty good time. So there you go, fellow dwarfers, just a very, very quick look at some examples of how huge the ship is. Let me know in the comments below what you think, and has this kind of opened your eyes on just how massive the ship is, so when you next go and watch some Dwarf, you'll have a better idea of just how big it really is. Well guys, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one. Give us a thumbs up if you did enjoy it. Hit the subscribe button if you've not done so already, and hit the bell icon so you know when the next episode is out. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time, Smegheads.